Morning at Boston Luxury Motors always felt like a world apart, where every car on display came with a price tag equivalent to a luxury penthouse. Sunlight filtered through floor-to-ceiling glass walls, casting a soft glow across the gleaming exteriors of names like Bentley, Porsche, and Aston Martin, each lined up like works of art. Here, luxury didn't need advertising. It radiated through its own quiet pride. And then, she walked in. Margaret Collins, Maggie, as those close to her called her, wore a simple white t-shirt, slightly faded jeans, and had her brown hair tied back in a ponytail. No makeup, no designer bag, no heels. She looked more like a woman, running errands than someone stepping into a luxury car showroom. But her eyes, those eyes, told a different story. They weren't the eyes of someone just browsing. They were the eyes of someone who had made up her mind. The only problem? No one bothered to look her in the eye. Blake Thompson, the showroom's sales manager, barely glanced her way as she stepped through the glass doors, just long enough to silently file her under wrong address. In his mind, she was one of those lost strays, someone who wandered in out of curiosity, not with the intention to buy. Dressed like that, she didn't even meet the standards of someone accompanying a potential customer. He adjusted his tie and smirked at a colleague, as though preparing for a bit of afternoon amusement. "Can I help you with something?" Came a voice, not Blake's, but Daniel's, a young salesman, relatively new to the job. Maggie smiled politely. "I'd like to see the deep blue coupe over there. It's for my sister. Her birthday's next month." What seemed like a harmless request set off silent alarms in Blake's head. He quickly stepped in, gently patting Daniel on the shoulder. "I'll take it from here." "Thanks, bud." He turned to Maggie, switching his expression to polite but dismissive. "Looking for the used cars lot? That's 3 blocks down." Maggie's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "No. I'd like to see the Azure Limited in deep blue. May I check out the interior?" Blake let out a small, dismissive laugh. "That one's just shy of 300 grand. We only show that model to serious buyers with appointments." As he spoke, 2 other employees exchanged amused glances nearby. "And Maggie?" She didn't flinch. She kept her gaze locked on the car, and something shifted quietly inside her. It wasn't that she hadn't been judged before. It was that, yet again, someone chose to see the shirt on her back instead of the person standing in front of them. Maggie stood there, motionless. She didn't lash out, didn't argue. She simply stayed quiet, as if letting everything unfold naturally before her eyes. While Blake turned to welcome a couple decked out in designer from head to toe, Danny, the young saleswoman, remained by Maggie's side. He hesitated for a second, then lowered his voice. "Actually, I can walk you through the Azure details if you'd like. I handle the product information." Maggie smiled gently. "Thank you. But I think I'll just take a moment to look around." From across the showroom, Blake was now in full sales mode, gushing to the couple. His hand gestured toward the very car Maggie had asked about, voice ringing with enthusiasm. "Only 15 of these in the entire country, but I've got one reserved, just for clients like yourselves." Just minutes earlier, that very car had been for appointment-only viewers. Now it was being opened up, doors swinging wide, interior offered like candy. Maggie stepped a little closer, watching quietly from a few feet away. Then, politely, she asked again, "Excuse me, I'd still like to inquire about the car. Would it be possible to purchase today?" Blake turned, and this time his eyes didn't bother to hide the annoyance. "As I said, someone's already shown interest, and, frankly, I don't believe this is the right fit for your current financial situation." Maggie kept her tone steady. "I'm prepared to wire the full amount today, in one transaction." Blake let out a loud laugh, sharp and theatrical, enough to turn heads in the showroom. "Wire the full amount? What is this? A flea market? Do you even realize this car is worth nearly $250,000? People who can afford that don't dress like... His gaze swept over her old sneakers and plain white tee. The room seemed to freeze. Maggie said nothing. She simply looked at him, not with challenge, not with embarrassment, but with a calmness that unsettled Blake more than any argument would have. Then she turned, pulled out her phone, and headed toward the exit. As she passed Daniel, she spoke just loud enough for him to hear, "Thank you for being kind." Daniel didn't know why, but something in his chest sank slightly. He had a feeling he just witnessed something far from ordinary. The next morning, Blake Thompson strolled into the showroom, beaming as usual. The t-shirt lady asking about a $300K car incident had already become his go-to joke in the break room. She thought she could buy the Azure in jeans. Get real, the others chuckled while Daniel sat in silence, lips pressed tight. At exactly 10:17 a.m., an unusual sound rolled through the showroom. The low, commanding growl of an engine so refined it felt like an entire world was gliding behind the glass. The room seemed to hold its breath. A midnight blue Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up slowly to the main entrance. Not just any Phantom, but the extended wheelbase edition worth over $1.2 million, its paint shimmering and shifting with the light. The key door opened. Out stepped a tall man with salt and pepper hair, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. His posture was straight, every step radiating authority. Blake rushed out, extending his business card with a practiced smile. "Good morning, sir. Blake Thompson, Senior Sales Manager. An absolute pleasure to assist you." The man gave a slight nod. "I'm Alexander Collins." Blake blinked. Something about the name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. Mr. Collins continued. "I'm here to look at the Azure, deep blue. My wife came in yesterday asking about it." Blake hesitated. "Ah, your wife? I'm not sure I recall. Perhaps a colleague of mine." Alexander cut him off, voice calm but icy. "No, you spoke with her directly. White t-shirt, jeans. Her name is Margaret Collins." Color drained from Blake's face. Before he could respond, Daniel's voice rang. Out behind him. "Mr. Collins, I was the only one who treated her respectfully. Blake." He paused, eyes briefly flicking toward his superior. "Told her the car wasn't suitable for someone like her." Silence spread through the showroom, like a wave. The dealership owner, Richard Mason, had just stepped out of his office and had caught every word. His face paled. Alexander looked calmly around the room. "My wife, who runs the Collins Foundation for Children with Disabilities, doesn't need to prove her bank account or wear designer heels to deserve basic respect." Richard jumped in, flustered. "We sincerely apologize. That's not what this dealership stands for." Alexander held up a hand to stop him. "I'm not here just to buy a car. I'm here to observe how you treat people." He walked over to the Azure, ran his hand gently across the hood, his eyes thoughtful. "And I can confirm this. My wife has impeccable taste." The entire showroom fell into stunned silence, as if someone had hit pause on time itself. Just moments ago, Blake Thompson had stood tall, exuding confidence. Now he was frozen, his lips moving, but no words coming out. The eyes of the staff, the customers, and, most piercing of all, those of dealership owner Richard Mason, bore down on him like stage lights exposing an actor who had missed his cue. Alexander Collins remained calm, unfazed by the spectacle. He extended a hand toward Daniel, the young associate who had spoken up. "I want you to handle the entire transaction from this point forward." Daniel blinked, surprised. Me, sir?" Alexander nodded. "You were the only one yesterday who acted with integrity," Blake stammered, scrambling for control. "Mr. Collins, I sincerely apologize for any misunderstanding. I'm sure there was some confusion. I didn't mean... What I meant was..." Alexander turned toward him, his eyes sharp as a blade. "You laughed in my wife's face. Told her to check the used lot 3 blocks down. Said people dressed like her didn't belong in this showroom. And now, because I'm standing here, you want to rewrite history?" Blake paled, still grasping for redemption. "I was just following standard protocol to filter out clients who might not be financially qualified. We have criteria for—" Alexander tilted his head, voice dropping a notch but carrying weight like iron. "To save time or to protect your fragile ego?" Blake had no answer. Richard Mason stepped forward quickly, his expression tense. "Mr. Collins, I deeply apologize for your wife's experience. I had no idea it had escalated to this level." Alexander gave a mirthless smile. "I'm not here for an apology. I came to see how you treat someone who doesn't fit the mold. And you've made that crystal clear." The air in the room thickened. He continued, "I'm not just here to buy the Azure. I've been reviewing suppliers for a company-wide fleet update. 7 luxury SUVs and additional orders for our California expansion." Richard held his breath. Blake looked shattered. The entire showroom stood still. Alexander turned toward the large glass window, gazing at the Rolls-Royce Phantom parked silently outside. His voice dropped. "But after yesterday, I'm asking myself, why should I invest in a place that can't recognize character beneath a white t-shirt?" No one dared respond. He turned back, gently placing a card on the counter. "My wife, Margaret Collins, is hosting a charity gala for children with disabilities next month. If you wish to salvage even a shred of dignity, I suggest Mr. Blake should attend." Blake swallowed hard. Alexander added, his voice loud and clear, filling the showroom. "Not as a guest, but as a volunteer server, to learn humility. To learn how to listen, things your $1,000 suit clearly never taught you." The words rang like a bell in a cathedral. All eyes turned to Blake, his pride crumbling under the weight of one single truth. Then Alexander faced Daniel. "As for the Azure, process the invoice today. Send it to the address listed on the card." Daniel nodded, his face beaming with a mix of pride and emotion. Alexander turned to leave, but just as his hand touched the door, he glanced back over his shoulder. "Oh, and one more thing. My wife's name is Margaret Collins. The woman you told to know her place." The door clicked shut behind him, and for a long moment not a single sound was heard. The staff stood still, awestruck, having just witnessed one of the most unforgettable moments in their careers. The moment arrogance was silenced, not by yelling, but by a simple truth. True worth has nothing to do with appearance. 1 month. After the incident at the showroom, the Grand Boston Hotel became the focal point of the entire city. The evening air softened under the glow of crystal chandeliers shimmering in the grand lobby. Elegant suits, flowing evening gowns, camera flashes. Everything painted a glamorous backdrop for the annual fundraising gala hosted by the Collins Foundation. In the center of this sophisticated scene stood Blake Thompson, the former sales manager once known for his smug posture on the showroom floor, now crouched down, adjusting the wheelchair of a young boy named Thomas. Gone was his signature navy blue suit. Tonight he wore a simple event volunteer uniform with a name tag that read, "Special Support Volunteer." Blake wiped a few beads of sweat from his brow, adjusted the toe of Thomas's shoe, then asked gently, "All good, Coach?" Thomas nodded eagerly. "All good. You still remember that elbow shot I taught you yesterday?" Blake chuckled. "How could I forget? My arm's still sore." Across the room, Maggie Collins entered the main hall in a simple, elegant, sapphire blue gown. Spotting Blake with Thomas, she smiled faintly. As she approached, Maggie said softly, "You've done well today, Blake." Blake stood up straight, though his eyes stayed low. "I used to think I understood what human worth meant. Turns out, I didn't know a thing." Maggie nodded, her expression thoughtful, not angry. "Attitude doesn't just define the person, it defines the culture they represent." Blake glanced around the ballroom. Children with disabilities playing freely. Sponsors listening intently to families' stories. Guests who'd once been dismissed because of appearances now illuminated by the spotlight. "I've learned more in the past 3 weeks," Blake whispered, "than in a decade selling cars." His voice trembled, not from fatigue, but from something far deeper. Maggie gently touched his shoulder. "Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what we do next." Just then, Alexander Collins appeared on stage. As he stepped up to the podium, the music faded and the lights converged on center stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander began, "I'd like to tell you a short story about arrogance and compassion." He didn't mention the showroom, didn't name Blake. Instead, he spoke of a man who once believed luxury was measured by clothing and success by a bank statement. But then, that man stumbled into an entirely different world. A world where children overcome adversity each day with a smile, never needing a luxury car to prove their worth. The room fell completely silent. Alexander concluded, "And today, that man is here. Not as someone seeking redemption, but as someone who's learned how to return his heart to where it belongs." All eyes turned to Blake. He bowed his head slightly, no longer hiding, but owning the moment. Applause rose, not explosive, not theatrical, but warm, steady, and genuine. Maggie stepped closer, leaned in, and whispered, "Sometimes we lose a deal to gain a person. I think today's trade was well worth it." Blake smiled, a smile filled with a depth of feeling that million-dollar commissions had never stirred. Moments later, Alexander approached him, extended a hand, and said, "We're still seeking a partner to handle our order of 7 SUVs for the company. Daniel says you've been quite the mentor lately." Blake's eyes widened in disbelief. Alexander nodded. "This time, I'll let you take the lead, if you're ready to turn the page to a chapter where customer value isn't measured by a Rolex." Blake gripped Alexander's hand tightly. "I'm ready, thank you, for not discarding me the way I once discarded others." The final scene of the gala was Blake kneeling to adjust Thomas's cap as the boy pointed toward the mini basketball court at the back of the hall. "After the gala, rematch time. And no dodging my moves this time." Blake laughed under the sparkling lights. "Coach Thomas throws down a challenge? Who could say no?" And with that, the room erupted in laughter. Not because a deal had just closed, but because a man had just found his way back to himself. 2 weeks after the gala, Boston Luxury Motors, the very showroom once at the center of ridicule and discrimination, was slowly taking on a new face. Not through new signage or decor, but through a quiet, comprehensive transformation, starting with the very people who had once been the core of its awkward downfall. Blake Thompson, the once arrogant sales manager, now stood before his team to deliver a short speech, this time without a polished tie or smug smile. "I used to think a great salesperson was someone who knew how to pick the right clients and weed out the wrong ones. I was wrong," Blake said sincerely. Behind him hung a freshly installed sign, "Boston Luxury Motors. A person's worth isn't measured by appearance." The room was silent. This didn't feel like any ordinary morning meeting. Today there were no targets discussed, no new models or upselling tactics. Today was about trust, about how we see people, about how this showroom would operate in a world that's changing every day. Blake stepped down and passed the floor to Daniel, the young salesman who'd been the only one to stand up for Maggie Collins that day. Now, Daniel was no longer the timid rookie. He'd just been promoted to Assistant Client Relations Manager, a newly created role, part of the company's post-crisis reform policy. "I used to think this job was about selling cars," Daniel said with a soft smile. "Now I realize, sometimes it's just about making someone feel seen, truly seen." New company policies were announced. No more pre-screening based on attire. No more customer tiering by watch brand. Instead, listen, serve, respect. Richard Mason, the former owner who had once stood by Blake during the showroom's worst moment, offered a public apology for the first time in front of all employees. He also announced he was stepping away from day-to-day operations, handing over leadership to a new board including both Daniel and Blake, with a mission to rebuild from the ground up, but this time with heart. One quiet weekend afternoon, Blake sat alone in a small cafe corner by the showroom, sipping an espresso. No thick files, no frantic phone calls, just a stack of local newspapers bearing bold headlines. From Prejudice to Progress, how Boston Luxury Motors found its redemption. Blake looked out through the glass window, watching an elderly woman with silver hair walk in with her young grandson, clutching a flyer about the dealership. The doorman greeted them with a warm smile, without asking their budget or whether they had an appointment. Across the showroom, Daniel was chatting with a customer dressed modestly. But his eyes lit up, the same way Blake's once did while closing a major deal. Only this time his gaze carried kindness. Blake closed his eyes for a moment. Maggie Collins came to mind. Not the moment she first walked into the showroom, but that moment during the gala, when she smiled while holding a sleeping, paralyzed child on her shoulder. He wondered, if only I'd learned this sooner. But then again, he thought, it's never too late if you're willing to change. That evening, a message lit up Blake's phone screen. It was from Alexander Collins. I heard you're leading the showroom in a new direction. Keep going. If you ever need support, I'm here. Blake didn't reply. He didn't need to. Some forgiveness isn't spoken. It's lived, by choosing to live differently from this day forward. One crisp late autumn morning, Boston was painted gold by rows of maple trees shedding their leaves. Blake Thompson stepped out of his house with a strange feeling in his chest. Not anxiety, not excitement, just quiet anticipation laced with a hint of nervousness. Today he was meeting the woman who had turned his world upside down, Maggie Collins. The meeting had been arranged a month after the gala. Though Maggie had already forgiven him with her eyes that night, the two had never truly sat down to talk. But today she agreed. The location, a quiet lakeside cafe. Simple, peaceful, unmistakably her style. When Blake arrived, Maggie was already there. She wore a cream-colored sweater, her hair tied back, no jewelry, no makeup. Still the woman he once mistook for someone. Out of place in his world. But now Blake knew. She was the one who redefined the world he lived in. Black coffee? No sugar? Maggie smiled. I remember that's what you ordered at the showroom, when you were someone else. Blake nodded gently and sat across from her. This time he brought no armor, no ego, no excuses, no masks. I know I used to be someone despicable, he began, and I understand not every apology is enough. Maggie looked at him quietly. A breeze stirred across the lake, carrying the scent of earth and a fading fall. I didn't come here for an apology, she said calmly. I came to find out what you've learned. Blake took a deep breath. That value doesn't lie in a suit or a fancy watch, he began. That appearances don't show how much someone has in their account, but how they treat the vulnerable says everything. He shared how he now trained new employees, always opening with the story of what happened with Maggie. He spoke of the humble customers he once overlooked, now his most loyal. He told her about Danny, the young salesman who had become the new heart of the showroom. Maggie listened, without interrupting. I've learned something, Elsie, too, Blake said, his voice softening. That sometimes the most painful slap comes not from anger, but from someone who simply wants you to open your eyes. Maggie chuckled. I didn't slap you, she said. I know, Blake replied, but I deserved it. They sat in silence for a while. The moment stretched, slow and still. Then Maggie set down her cup. Do you know why I never dress lavishly, even though I could? She asked. Blake shook his head. Because I don't want my daughter, or any child I help, to grow up believing kindness is measured by designer shoes or luxury cars. I want them to know that hands dirty from helping others are worth more than wrists with Rolexes that never reach out to anyone. Blake said nothing. Her words didn't cut skin, but carved deep. One last thing, Maggie said. You once said I cost you a customer. Today, I hope, I helped you find yourself. Blake pressed his lips together, his eyes lowering. Not just find. I discovered someone I never knew I could be. Maggie stood, slipped on her coat. That's enough, she said. I don't need promises. I don't need you to change the world. Just treat the person across from you with a little kindness, no matter what they're wearing. She extended her hand. Deal? Blake stood and took her hand. A short handshake, yet it lingered longer than any season. As Maggie turned and walked away, Blake watched her go. He didn't see a woman walking out of a cafe. He saw a lesson leaving quietly behind him, one more powerful than any MBA course he had ever taken. 2 weeks after Maggie and Blake's conversation, in the quiet garden behind the Collins estate, where maple trees were glowing in hues of amber and crimson, Alexander sat on a stone bench under the veranda. A laptop rested on his lap, his eyes focused on the latest reports from their charitable initiatives. Maggie stepped outside, holding 2 cups of ginger tea. She gently took a seat beside him. I saw Blake again, she said, placing a cup in his hand. Alexander nodded slightly, his gaze still fixed on the still lake in front of them. I'm guessing he's changed. More than I expected, Maggie smiled. Not because he got caught, but because he woke up. Alexander set the laptop aside and turned to face his wife. Sometimes people don't need punishment. They just need a nudge to awaken their conscience. And I believe I did the right thing, Maggie replied. Not with power, not with money, but with silence at the right moment, and the right lesson for the right person. The space between them softened, as if the world outside paused for a heartbeat to make room for reflection. You know what sets you apart? Alexander asked. What? Maggie looked up. You never let anger drive your actions, he said. You choose compassion, and somehow it's more effective than any retaliation. Maggie let out a quiet laugh, her eyes glowing with tenderness. Maybe it's because I used to be one of the judged, she said. I know what it feels like to be looked at head to toe, dismissed from the conversation, just because I didn't fit someone's idea of presentation. I made myself a promise. If I ever got the power to change that, I'd do it through kindness, not authority. Alexander gently squeezed her hand. And you kept that promise. You didn't just change a man, you changed a system. A breeze drifted through, carrying the cheerful sounds from the nearby Play R, where the Collins Foundation was hosting its regular community event. Children in wheelchairs, with wooden crutches and wide smiles, laughed and played under the care of volunteers organizing games, meals, and life skills workshops. Blake Thompson stood by a little girl with paralyzed legs, patiently showing her how to control a basketball using her crutches. His voice was calm, his eyes focused. Every movement radiated sincerity, no longer the arrogant showroom manager he once was. Maggie watched and smiled softly. I think we finally got what we wanted, she said. Not revenge, but transformation, Alexander nodded. And the best part, he added, you planted the seed. No name tags, no designer dresses, no spotlight. Just quiet strength, patience, and the belief that people can learn if you give them a chance. Maggie leaned her head on his shoulder. Together, they gazed out toward the guard, where children's laughter rose like a symphony of the future. No judgment, no exclusion, no rush to label. As sunlight shimmered across the surface of the lake, Alexander spoke, as if summarizing it all, with no need for grand phrases. People spend their lives chasing value in expensive things. But sometimes it's all in how you see others, when no one important is watching. Maggie smiled. Or when you're the one they didn't think mattered. In that moment, without another word, their world felt complete. We often say, don't judge a book by its cover. But in today's world of glitz and glamour, how many people still truly believe that? The story of Maggie Collins isn't just a lesson for those quick to judge someone by their appearance. It's proof that kindness, wisdom, and compassion will always rise above prejudice. Blake Thompson thought he was selling million-dollar cars, but what he didn't realize was that the most valuable thing he gained, it was a lesson you can't put a price tag on, a lesson about the true worth of a person. And what about you? Have you ever been judged because of how you looked? Or perhaps, without realizing it, judged someone else just because they didn't match what you expected? If this story stirred something inside you, hit that subscribe button. Because this won't be the last lesson. Here, every story is a journey, and that journey may start with a misjudged glance, but always ends in growth, and sometimes forgiveness.